A short while ago, as is detailed on your custody record out there, you had a conversation with your mum, and you then requested that the self come into the room. Is that right? Yeah. And what was it you told us?
Imagine being 10 years old. The world feels endless. Every street an adventure, every shop a new discovery. You hold your friend's hand, laughing, daring each other to push boundaries you barely understand. Now picture those same small hands leading another child away. Not to play, not to explore, but to harm, to kill. Some names in history are remembered for greatness, others for unspeakable acts. And the most chilling of all are the children who crossed that line. Their crimes etched into whispers, headlines, and nightmares. And perhaps the most haunting place to begin is Liverpool, 1993, when two boys, no older than 10, committed a murder that shocked the entire world. John Venables and Robert Thompson.
This interview is being tape recorded. I'm Detective Sergeant Roberts. Now, what's your full name?
Robert Thompson.
How did he come up to John?
How did you come up to John?
James.
No, he was walking down the strand.
Who was? James?
The baby.
Was he?
I told him to take him back.
You did what?
Told him to take him back.
You told him to take it back?
All right,
Bobby. No, you're not getting all the blame. I'm just asking your son. I'm trying to find the truth.
We always get the blame.
Wait a minute, Bobby.
Liverpool, February 12th, 1993. The New Strand shopping centre was buzzing with life. Families browsing, children tugging at their parents' arms, the noise of an ordinary afternoon. But among the crowd were two boys who didn't belong there. John Venables and Robert Thompson, both just 10 years old. They had skipped school that day. Instead of lessons, they wandered the shops, stealing sweets and toys, testing how far they could push their luck. But they were looking for more than mischief. They were hunting. But then, their eyes fell on a toddler. 2-year-old James Bulger strayed only a few steps from his mother at a butcher's counter. In those few seconds, Venables and Thompson seized the moment. They coaxed James away, holding his tiny hand as if they were carrying older brothers. Witnesses later recalled seeing them, a toddler between two bigger boys stumbling along. Some asked if James was lost, but the answers were calm, convincing. They said they were taking him home. And so, no one stopped them. For more than 2 miles, the boys led James across Liverpool, through streets, past shops, even by police officers. The toddler cried, resisted, but kept walking. With every step, the danger became harder to deny.
I'm gonna end up getting all the blame because I've got blood on me.
We're asking you, son, and we want you to tell us the truth, that's all. Not give the blame to you or anything else. But it's only the truth that we're concerned about.
Johnny threw a brick in his face.
Hours later, James Bulger's body was found near a railway line. When investigators discovered who had killed him, the world recoiled. 2 children, barely older than primary school students, had committed a murder that scarred a nation. Their arrest and trial sparked outrage, grief, and debate. Should they be treated as children who didn't understand, or as killers who knew exactly what they were doing? Decades later, the names Venables and Thompson still send a chill through Britain. And just when you think it can't get darker, another child's story proves it can. Cayetano Godino, Buenos Aires, the early 1900s. The streets were alive with noise, children chasing each other through alleys, carriages rattling across cobblestones, vendors calling out in crowded markets. But hidden among the bustle was a boy who would soon terrify an entire nation. His name was Cayetano Godino. He was only 16 when police finally stopped him, but his violence had begun years earlier. Nicknamed El Petiso Orejudo, the big-eared midget, Godino was small, frail, and often mocked. Yet behind his slight frame hid impulses darker than anyone could imagine. By the age of 7, he was already luring younger children away, not to share toys or games, but to beat and strangle them. His fascination with cruelty extended to animals. He tortured and killed cats in the streets, a disturbing pattern that foreshadowed what he would later do to children. Soon he added fire to his obsessions, setting homes, warehouses, and sheds ablaze simply to watch them burn. As he grew older, his attacks escalated. Toddlers and young children were found beaten, strangled, or left for dead in alleys and abandoned lots. When police finally arrested him in 1912, Godino confessed to at least 4 murders and multiple attempted murders. What horrified investigators most was his calm manner of describing the crimes, speaking of death as if it were a game. Too young for the death penalty, Godino was declared insane and sentenced to life in prison. But even there, his violent impulses never stopped. He continued to kill animals, once strangling a cat inside the prison courtyard. The act enraged fellow inmates so much that they attacked and beat him severely. For the rest of his life, he was feared and despised not only by society, but even by those behind bars with him. Cayetano Godino remains one of Argentina's most infamous killers. His story stands as a grim reminder that cruelty can take root long before adulthood, and that sometimes the face of a child hides nothing but darkness. And if Godino's crimes seemed unimaginable, the next case shows how innocence itself can become the deadliest disguise. Mary Bell, Newcastle, 1968. The city was alive with the sounds of children playing in the streets, the kind of summer noise every parent expects to hear. But behind one little girl's wide eyes hid something much darker. Her name was Mary Bell. She was just 11 years old. Mary's childhood was troubled from the start. She grew up in poverty, neglected, and exposed to violence at home. But what shocked the world was how that violence took root in her. On the day before her 11th birthday, Mary lured a 4-year-old boy to an abandoned house. Hours later, the child was found dead, strangled. At first, no one suspected her. After all, who would imagine that such a small girl could commit murder? But only 2 months later, Mary struck again. This time, her victim was a 3-year-old boy. Once more, she lured him away. Once more, she killed. When the truth finally emerged, the press gave her a name that still echoes in British true crime: the Tyneside Strangler. The image of a schoolgirl who should have been playing with dolls, instead taking lives, left the country horrified. At trial, Mary showed little emotion. The jury found her guilty of manslaughter due to diminished responsibility. She was sentenced to detention for life, though she would later be released as an adult under a new identity. Even decades later, the name Mary Bell carries a haunting weight, a reminder that innocence can sometimes be the perfect mask for evil. But Mary wasn't the only child whose violent impulses ended in tragedy. Across the ocean, another boy would shock America by turning his own bedroom into a crime scene: Joshua Phillips. Jacksonville, Florida, 1998. A quiet neighborhood, the kind where children ride bikes on sidewalks and families leave doors unlocked. But behind one of those doors, a crime unfolded that shocked America. And at the center of it was a 14-year-old boy named Joshua Phillips. Joshua lived with his parents in a modest home. By all accounts, he was a typical teenager, shy, into video games, and rarely in trouble. But on one October afternoon, everything changed. While playing outside, he lured his 8-year-old neighbor, Maddie Clifton, into his house. When Maddie didn't return home, her disappearance triggered a massive community search. For days, neighbors, police, and volunteers scoured the area. Joshua even joined in, helping look for the girl he knew would never be found. Because all along, Maddie's body was hidden just feet away, in Joshua's bedroom, under his waterbed. When police finally discovered the truth, the neighborhood was devastated. A boy they thought they knew had committed a murder in his own home, and then slept for days above the body of his victim. At trial, Joshua was tried as an adult and sentenced to life in prison without parole. To this day, questions linger. Was it a moment of panic, or something far darker hiding beneath his quiet exterior? But Joshua wasn't the only teenager capable of masking cruelty behind an innocent face. Soon after, another young killer, a girl this time, would prove that even childhood curiosity can twist into something terrifying. Alyssa Bustamante, Missouri, 2009. In a small town where everyone knew each other, a 15-year-old girl named Alyssa Bustamante harbored a secret that would shock her community to its core. On the surface, Alyssa was a typical teenager. She went to school, spent hours online, and posted pictures with friends. But behind the mask of normalcy, she was obsessed with death. Her social media was littered with disturbing messages. Her journal spoke of pain, control, and curiosity about killing. One chilling entry even asked, "If I kill someone, will I know what it feels like to be God?" On October 21st, she decided to find out. That afternoon, Alyssa lured her 9-year-old neighbor Elizabeth Olton into the woods near her home. Hidden deep in those trees were 2 shallow graves Alyssa had dug days earlier. Proof that this wasn't an impulsive act, but something she had carefully planned. There she carried out a crime so cold it seemed unimaginable for a girl her age. When Elizabeth went missing, panic swept through the town. Police, neighbors, and volunteers searched for days, calling her name, clinging to hope. But Alyssa already knew the truth, and eventually, under questioning, she confessed. Not only had she killed Elizabeth, she described the act in her journal with chilling detachment, writing, "I strangled them and slit their throat and stabbed them. Now I have to go to church, LOL." At trial, those words shocked the courtroom. The laughter, the casual tone, the word amazing she used to describe the murder. It stripped away any illusion of remorse. Alyssa was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. Her case left a scar on all who heard it, a reminder that cruelty doesn't always wear the face we expect. Sometimes it hides in the smile of a teenage girl. And if Alyssa's crime was chilling for its calculation, the next young killer would terrify America for a very different reason, because his violence wasn't planned, but unleashed in a sudden storm of rage. Craig Price, Warwick, Rhode Island, the late 1980s. A suburban community where violent crime was rare, suddenly became the backdrop for one of the youngest and most brutal killers in American history, Craig Price. Craig seemed like any other teenager. He played sports, cracked jokes, and lived in a quiet neighborhood. But at just 13 years old, he committed his first murder. A neighbor, stabbed to death in her own home. It didn't stop there. Over the next 2 years, Craig killed again and again. By the time he was 15, he had taken the lives of 4 people, including 2 young children. The sheer brutality of the crimes horrified investigators. They weren't just murders, they were frenzied attacks, carried out with shocking violence. When Craig was arrested, his age stunned the public almost as much as his crimes. At 15, the law treated him as a juvenile, meaning he would likely be released by his early 20s, free despite having committed acts most adults couldn't even fathom. The case ignited national debate over how young offenders should be punished. To many, Craig Price wasn't just a troubled teenager. He was a predator who had begun his killing spree before even reaching high school. And as shocking as his story was, another case would soon push the boundary of disbelief even further. A child so young, he became known as the world's youngest serial killer. Amarjeet Sada, Bihar, India, 2007. A rural village where families knew each other by name, where children roamed freely in the sun-baked fields, and where neighbors trusted one another. But hidden within that trust was a secret so horrifying it stunned the world. Amarjeet Sada was only 8 years old when he confessed to murder. Not once, but 3 times. His victims were infants, some barely old enough to be cradled in their mother's arms. One of them was his own cousin. At first, no one believed it. The idea that a boy still in primary school, with small hands and a child's grin, could kill babies seemed impossible. But Amarjeet admitted it calmly, even proudly. Witnesses say he smiled as he explained what he had done, showing no trace of guilt or fear. The truth spread quickly through the village, and what followed was outrage, confusion, and disbelief. Parents kept their children close. Rumors whispered about a boy possessed, cursed, or born without conscience. To the police, however, one fact was clear. Amarjeet had taken 3 lives before reaching his 9th birthday. Authorities labeled him the world's youngest serial killer. Yet under Indian law, he was too young to face prison or trial. Instead, he was sent to a children's home, where questions lingered. Could he be reformed, or would the violence only return with age? The case left behind an image as haunting as it was unforgettable. An 8-year-old boy who killed without remorse, smiling as he recounted his crimes. It forced the world to ask a chilling question. How early can darkness take hold of the human soul? And Amarjeet wasn't the first child whose violent urges surfaced at an unthinkably young age. Over a century earlier, another boy would gain a reputation so terrifying, history would remember him as the boy fiend, Jesse Pomeroy, Boston, 1870s. In the bustling streets of a growing American city, children played freely, their parents unaware that one boy among them would soon earn a reputation as one of the most feared young killers in history. His name was Jesse Pomeroy. He was only 12 when the violence began. Jesse stood out. His appearance was unsettling. One eye was clouded, his expression cold. But what truly set him apart were the acts he carried out against other children. He lured younger boys to remote areas where he beat, cut, and tortured them. Several victims survived, but the community was shaken by his cruelty. It wasn't long before his crimes escalated. At just 14 years old, Jesse murdered a 10-year-old girl. Weeks later, a 4-year-old boy was found dead, and suspicion quickly fell on Jesse. The evidence was undeniable. When arrested, he showed little remorse, and his youth only deepened the horror. The press branded him the boy fiend, a child whose actions seemed more like those of a sadistic adult than a teenager. Jesse Pomeroy was convicted and sentenced to life in prison, where he remained until his death decades later. His story left Boston haunted, a grim reminder that cruelty can manifest terrifyingly early. And as terrifying as Jesse's crimes were, the late 1990s would see another shocking case. Two boys whose rampage would forever change how America viewed school safety. Mitchell Johnson and Andrew Golden, Jonesboro, Arkansas, March 24, 1998. A quiet school day that should have ended like any other instead became one of the deadliest school shootings in American history, and the killers were children. Mitchell Johnson was just 13, Andrew Golden only 11. Together they plotted an attack that would leave their small town in shock. That afternoon, Andrew pulled the fire alarm, sending hundreds of students and teachers rushing outside. Waiting for them at the edge of the schoolyard was Mitchell, armed and ready. From their hiding spot, the boys opened fire. When it was over, 5 people were dead, 4 classmates and a teacher, and many more were injured. The ages of the shooters stunned the world. How could children not even in high school plan and execute such violence? The aftermath was filled with outrage. Because of their ages, Mitchell and Andrew couldn't be tried as adults. Both were released by their early 20s, a fact that left survivors and families outraged, knowing the killers of their loved ones were free. The attack forever changed the way America thought about school safety. It showed in the most tragic way possible that the threat of violence wasn't limited to adults. And just a few years earlier, another community had faced a shock of its own, when a red-haired boy lured a child into the woods, never to return home alive. Eric Smith, Steuben County, New York, August 1993. A summer day in a quiet town, where children rode bikes and parents felt safe letting them roam. But that safety was shattered by a boy with fiery red hair and an unsettling secret. His name was Eric Smith. He was just 13 years old. That morning, 4-year-old Derek Roby was walking the short distance to a summer program at a local park. On the way, he crossed paths with Eric. Smiling, the teenager lured the smaller boy off the sidewalk and into the woods. What happened next horrified the community. Eric attacked Derek with brutal force, leaving his small body in the clearing. When the news broke, neighbors were stunned. Nobody could believe that the polite, shy boy they saw riding his bike through town was capable of such violence. Eric confessed days later, his calm description of the crime chilling investigators. At trial, his young face became a symbol of lost innocence. The jury convicted him of second-degree murder, and he was sentenced to prison, where he would spend decades before finally being released in 2022. The case of Eric Smith left behind a haunting question. What could drive a 13-year-old to kill a child half his age? And as unsettling as his story was, the next would prove just as shocking, because this time the killer wasn't a teenager, but a boy barely old enough to play Little League. Lionel Tate, Florida, 1999. A suburban home, a babysitter, and an evening that should have been uneventful. But instead, it ended in tragedy. and placed a 12-year-old boy at the center of one of America's most controversial child murder cases. His name was Lionel Tate. Lionel was left in charge of 6-year-old Tiffany Unick, a family friend. At some point during the night, he began imitating professional wrestling moves he had seen on television. What started as play quickly escalated into something far more violent. Hours later, Tiffany was dead. The injuries she suffered were so severe that investigators struggled to believe they could have been accidental. A broken skull, broken ribs, and massive internal damage. At just 12 years old, Lionel Tate was charged with first-degree murder. His case made headlines worldwide. Could a boy so young truly understand the difference between play and lethal violence? In 2001, he became the youngest American ever sentenced to life in prison without parole. Years later, after appeals and public outcry, his sentence was reduced, but the debate his case sparked has never gone away. Lionel Tate's story remains one of the most haunting examples of blurred lines between innocence and brutality. And soon after, another boy would take things even further. Not with play, not with accident, but with cold and deliberate intent. Graham Young, England, 1960s. A quiet teenager with a fascination that seemed unusual but harmless at first. Chemistry. Graham Young spent hours buried in books about chemicals, collecting bottles and mixing compounds in his bedroom. But his curiosity didn't stay confined to experiments. It evolved into an obsession with poisons. By 14, Graham had begun testing his knowledge. At first, it was on small animals, watching how they suffered. Then he turned to his own family. His stepmother, father, and even his sister began to fall mysteriously ill. They complained of sharp stomach pains, dizziness, and crippling weakness, symptoms Graham carefully recorded in notebooks like a scientist observing a study. To him, they were test subjects. The truth came out only after his stepmother died. Investigators discovered Graham's detailed poison journals filled with notes about doses, effects, and timing. At just 14 years old, he was arrested and sent to a psychiatric hospital, but that wasn't the end of his story. Years later, Graham was released back into society. He found work at a photographic supplies company, and soon colleagues began falling sick. The same pattern emerged: headaches, cramps, vomiting. This time, the trail of suspicion quickly circled back to him. Several employees died, and when police searched his belongings, they once again found meticulous notes. The teenager, once nicknamed the teacup poisoner, had become a calculating killer who used chemistry as his weapon. Graham Young became infamous as one of Britain's most chilling examples of intellect, twisted into cruelty. His case was a reminder that not all killers need knives or guns. Sometimes knowledge itself can be the deadliest weapon of all. And while Graham relied on patience and poison, the next young killer's attack would be sudden, frenzied, and terrifying. When a boy in Florida turned on his own best friend, Michael Hernandez, Miami, Florida, 2004. A middle school like any other, filled with chatter, backpacks, and the shuffle of sneakers down crowded hallways. But in one classroom, a 14-year-old boy named Michael Hernandez was harboring a deadly secret plan. Michael wasn't the type most would suspect. He was quiet, intelligent, and kept to himself. But behind his calm demeanor, he had been writing a list, targets he planned to kill. Among them was his best friend, Jaime Goff. One morning before class, Michael lured Jaime into a school bathroom. There he carried out a brutal attack that left the entire school reeling. Shockingly, he had prepared for it, bringing gloves, a knife, and even a change of clothes. It wasn't an accident, it was premeditated. When he was caught, Michael showed little remorse. In fact, investigators discovered he had been fascinated by serial killers and had dreamed of becoming one himself. At trial, the evidence was overwhelming. Michael Hernandez was sentenced to life in prison, where he remained until his death in 2021. His story left a haunting message. Sometimes the most dangerous person is the one you least expect, the quiet boy in the back of the classroom. And while Michael's crime was born of obsession, the next young killer's rampage came from rage, an eruption of violence in a school shooting that still shocks to this day. Loukaitis, Washington State, 1996. It was an ordinary afternoon at Frontier Middle School, until a 14-year-old boy named Barry Loukaitis walked into his algebra class armed with a rifle, pistols, and a storm of rage. Barry had been a troubled teenager, isolated, fascinated by dark literature and violent fantasies. He felt out of place in the world around him. But no one expected that he would turn those thoughts into action. On February 2nd, during class, Barry opened fire. The room erupted into chaos. In just moments, he killed 2 classmates and their teacher, and injured another student. Terrified children scrambled for cover. The classroom transformed into a nightmare. When the gunfire stopped, Barry was overpowered and taken into custody. At trial, the sheer coldness of his attack stunned the public. He showed little remorse, and the question lingered. Was this the outburst of a disturbed teenager, or the calculated cruelty of someone who had decided to embrace evil? He was sentenced to life in prison, where he remains. His crime became one of the earliest examples of a school shooting carried out by a young teenager, a grim warning of tragedies that would follow in the years to come. And while Barry's rampage was horrifying, the next case would be even more unsettling, because unlike most, this killer didn't stop at one victim. He hunted again and again. Harvey Miguel Robinson, Allentown, Pennsylvania, 1993. A quiet industrial town that never expected to harbor one of America's youngest serial killers. His name was Harvey Miguel Robinson, only 18 years old when his reign of terror began. Harvey had grown up in violence. His father was abusive, his home life fractured, and from an early age, he developed a disturbing fascination with domination and control. But while many troubled youths acted out in small, destructive ways, Harvey's darkness went much further. He wanted power over life and death. That year, his community became the hunting ground. He stalked women, breaking into their homes under the cover of night. His attacks were brutal, filled with rage, cruelty, and a chilling lack of empathy. In one case, he murdered a 15-year-old girl. In another, he strangled a 47-year-old woman in her own home. His victims varied in age, but his intent never changed: violence without mercy. The killings shocked Allentown. Police were left scrambling, desperate to understand who could commit such atrocities. But Harvey wasn't done. He attacked again, and this time, one victim survived, a woman who managed to escape and identify him. That testimony cracked the case wide open. Soon after, Harvey was arrested. In court, his youth only made the horror worse. How could someone so young commit crimes so calculated, so merciless? The courtroom heard details of his stalking, his assaults, his murders, and the enjoyment he seemed to take in them. Harvey Miguel Robinson was convicted and sentenced to death. His case remains infamous, not only for the brutality of his crimes, but because he stands among the youngest serial killers in American history. A reminder that sometimes evil doesn't wait to grow old. Childhood is supposed to mean safety, laughter, innocence. Yet these stories tear that belief apart. They show us that cruelty can take root long before adulthood, and that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are those who still sit in classrooms and ride bicycles home. Evil doesn't wait. And in these rare but unforgettable cases, it began when life had barely even started.